From luxury mansions to sleeping in an abandoned village hut, Ethan Cole lost everything overnight. Betrayed by those he trusted, Ethan went from living in extreme wealth to hunting in the forest just to survive. But what happened next shocked everyone. Ethan Cole stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his office and looked down at the city below. Hundreds of cars moved through the streets like tiny insects. The morning sun reflected off the glass buildings surrounding his headquarters. Everything Ethan saw belonged to the world he had built. At just 32 years old, Ethan was one of the richest men in the country. His company owned hotels, construction firms, technology businesses, and shopping centers. Newspapers called him a genius. Television stations invited him for interviews. Young entrepreneurs dreamed of becoming the next Ethan Cole. Yet success had come at a cost. For years, Ethan had worked almost every day. He rarely slept more than a few hours each night. Business meetings filled his schedule from morning until evening. His fiancée, Vanessa, often complained that he cared more about work than anything else. "You need to slow down," she told him one evening during dinner. Ethan smiled. "I'll rest when I retire." Vanessa shook her head. "At this rate, you'll never retire." Ethan laughed and reached for her hand. At the time, he thought everything was fine. He had no idea his world was about to collapse. The next morning began like any other. Ethan arrived at the company headquarters shortly before 8 o'clock. Employees greeted him with smiles as he walked through the lobby. Then he noticed something strange. Several police vehicles were parked outside the building. Groups of reporters crowded the entrance. Television cameras pointed toward the doors. A feeling of unease settled in his stomach. Before Ethan could ask questions, 2 officers approached him. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes. We need you to come with us." Ethan stared at them. "What is this about?" The older officer handed him a document. "Your company is under investigation for fraud and financial crimes." Ethan blinked. "That has to be a mistake." The officers exchanged glances. "Sir, please come with us." Within minutes, Ethan found himself surrounded by investigators. They showed him documents, bank records, financial reports, transfer receipts. According to the evidence, billions of dollars had disappeared from company accounts. The transactions appeared to carry Ethan's authorization. But Ethan knew something was wrong. He had never approved those transfers. Someone had forged the records. Someone had set him up. The realization hit him like a punch. His business partners. Only a handful of people had access to those accounts. Only a handful of people could have done this. Over the following weeks, the situation grew worse. Every news channel carried the story. Every newspaper printed his name. The public believed he was guilty. People who once praised him now criticized him. Investors pulled out. Business deals collapsed. Government agencies froze company accounts. Court cases began appearing one after another. Ethan fought desperately to prove his innocence. But the evidence seemed overwhelming. Every day brought another disaster. Then came the betrayals. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. Business associates disappeared. People who once begged for meetings suddenly acted as if they had never known him. The loneliness was crushing. But the deepest wound came from Vanessa. One evening she arrived at his mansion carrying a suitcase. Ethan immediately understood. "You're leaving." Vanessa looked away. "I can't do this anymore."
"Vanessa, I'm innocent."
"I don't know what to believe." "You know me." Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I did." She walked away. The front door closed behind her. And just like that, she was gone. Ethan stood alone in the massive mansion. The silence felt unbearable. Weeks later, the courts ordered the seizure of most of his remaining assets while investigations continued. Luxury cars disappeared. Properties were taken. Accounts were frozen. Employees were laid off. His empire crumbled piece by piece. One rainy afternoon, Ethan sat alone in what used to be his favorite room. The mansion felt empty. The walls seemed colder than before. For the first time in years, there were no meetings to attend. No business calls to answer. No investors demanding updates. Just silence. As he stared at the rain outside, a memory surfaced. His grandfather, the old hunter from Amani village. Ethan could still hear his grandfather's voice. A man who can survive in the forest can survive anywhere. As a child, Ethan had spent a few summers in the village. His grandfather had taught him simple lessons: how to follow tracks, how to respect nature, how to remain calm during difficult times. Back then, Ethan had considered those lessons old-fashioned. Now they felt more valuable than anything he had learned in the corporate world. A few days later, the final blow arrived. The mansion itself would be seized. Ethan had to leave. He packed what little remained: some clothes, a few personal items, several photographs. That was all. The billionaire who once owned everything now carried his entire life inside a single bag. As Ethan stepped outside the mansion for the last time, he turned to look at it. The grand building stood proudly against the evening sky. For years, it had been a symbol of his success. Now it was simply another thing he had lost. Oddly enough, he didn't cry. He felt tired, empty. But somewhere deep inside, a small spark remained alive. Maybe his grandfather had been right. Maybe survival had nothing to do with money. With nowhere else to go, Ethan boarded a bus heading toward Amani village. The journey lasted several hours. As the city disappeared behind him, tall buildings gave way to green fields and forests. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. He didn't know what awaited him in the village. He didn't know how he would survive. He didn't know that the forest was about to change his life forever. All Ethan knew was that the billionaire life was over. A completely different journey was about to begin. The bus finally stopped just after sunrise. Ethan Cole stepped down onto the dusty road and looked around. For a moment, he simply stood there. The air felt different, fresh, clean. The smell of trees and wet earth replaced the scent of gasoline and concrete he had grown used to in the city. Ahead of him stood Amani village, the place where his grandfather had once lived, the place he had not visited in nearly 20 years. Children ran across open fields chasing one another. Women carried baskets on their heads. Farmers walked toward their farmlands with hoes resting on their shoulders. Life moved slowly here, very slowly. Nobody rushed. Nobody stared at phones. Nobody seemed interested in stock prices or business deals. It was a completely different world. Ethan adjusted the small bag hanging from his shoulder and began walking. At first, nobody recognized him. Why would they? The man walking through the village looked nothing like the billionaire who had appeared on television and magazine covers. His clothes were old. His beard had grown out. His eyes carried a tiredness that wealth could never hide. Then an elderly man selling fruits looked closer. His eyes widened. "Wait, Ethan?" Ethan stopped. The old man slowly approached. "You are Ethan Cole." Ethan forced a smile. "Yes." The old man looked shocked. "The billionaire?" A few nearby villagers turned toward them. Within minutes, whispers spread through the village. People began gathering. Some stared with curiosity. Others whispered among themselves. A few even pointed. Ethan suddenly felt uncomfortable. He had spent years being famous. Yet now, attention felt different. There was no admiration, only surprise and pity. A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "We heard what happened." Ethan nodded quietly. "I'm sorry." The woman sighed. "Your grandfather was a good man." Hearing those words touched Ethan deeply. His grandfather had died years ago, but people still remembered him. That meant something. After exchanging a few polite greetings, Ethan continued walking. The path eventually led him to the edge of the village. There, hidden behind tall grass and overgrown bushes, stood his grandfather's old house. Ethan stopped. His chest tightened. Time had not been kind to the building. Parts of the roof had collapsed. The wooden walls looked worn. Vines crawled across the exterior. Broken windows stared back at him like empty eyes. The house looked abandoned. Because it was. For years nobody had lived there. Slowly, Ethan pushed open the front door. Dust immediately filled the air. Spider webs hung from corners. Old furniture sat exactly where it had been left. Felt as though time had frozen. Ethan walked through each room. Memories returned. He remembered sitting beside his grandfather during rainy evenings. He remembered listening to stories about hunting adventures. He remembered laughing around small cooking fires. Back then, life had seemed simple. Now those memories felt priceless. By afternoon, Ethan began cleaning. He swept floors, removed broken furniture, opened windows, cleared dust. The work was exhausting. His muscles ached. His hands became dirty. But something about the labor felt satisfying. Years ago, Ethan would have paid workers to do this. Now he did it himself. And strangely, he enjoyed it. As evening approached, several villagers arrived carrying supplies. One woman brought drinking water. Another brought food. A farmer brought a lantern. Ethan was surprised. "You don't have to do this." The farmer smiled. "Your grandfather helped many people." Another villager nodded. "We haven't forgotten." For the first time since losing everything, Ethan felt genuine kindness. Nobody asked him for money. Nobody wanted business favors. Nobody expected anything. They were simply helping. That night, Ethan sat alone inside the house. A lantern flickered beside him. The sounds of insects filled the darkness outside. The village was quiet, much quieter than the city. At first, the silence felt strange. Then it became comforting. After finishing his meal, Ethan continued exploring the house. Inside an old bedroom, he discovered a wooden trunk hidden beneath a bed. Curious, he opened it. Dust rose into the air. Inside were dozens of items belonging to his grandfather. Old hunting knives, leather pouches, maps, handmade tools, and several worn journals. Ethan carefully picked up one of the journals. The pages were yellow with age. His grandfather's handwriting covered every page. For hours, Ethan read. The journals contained stories of hunting trips, survival lessons, and observations about the forest. Some entries described tracking animals. Others explained how to find water during dry seasons. Many contained lessons about patience and discipline. One sentence caught Ethan's attention. "The forest provides for those who respect it." He read it again, then again. Something about those words stayed with him. As midnight approached, Ethan continued reading. The more he read, the more fascinated he became. His grandfather had not simply been a hunter. He had been a student of nature, a man who understood the forest in ways Ethan could barely imagine. Eventually, exhaustion overcame him. He spread a blanket on an old bed and lay down. The mattress was uncomfortable. The room was warm. The roof creaked occasionally. Yet Ethan slept better than he had in months. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows. Birds chirped outside. For a few seconds, Ethan forgot everything that had happened. Then reality returned. He was no longer a billionaire. His empire was gone. His future remained uncertain. Yet instead of despair, he felt determination. After breakfast, Ethan grabbed one of the journals and stepped outside. Beyond the village stretched miles of forest. Dense trees covered the hills. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. The wilderness seemed endless. Many people would have felt afraid. Ethan felt curious. The forest had been part of his grandfather's life. Perhaps it could become part of his own. He opened the journal and looked at one of the first lessons. It explained how to recognize animal tracks. Simple drawings filled the page. Ethan smiled. He had no idea whether he could actually learn these skills. But he was willing to try. For the first time since losing everything, he had a purpose. A small purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped toward the forest. The villagers watched from a distance. Some shook their heads. Others laughed quietly. To them, the fallen billionaire looked completely out of place. What could a businessman possibly know about surviving in the wild? Ethan heard some of the comments, but he ignored them, because deep inside something had changed. He was no longer chasing wealth. He was no longer trying to impress anyone. He simply wanted to learn. And somewhere among those trees, hidden beneath the forest canopy, the next chapter of his life was waiting. The forest humbled Ethan Cole faster than any business rival ever had. On his first day, he entered the wilderness carrying one of his grandfather's journals, a small knife, and a confidence that quickly disappeared. First, everything looked simple. The trees seemed easy to navigate. The trails appeared clear. The sounds of birds made the forest feel welcoming. But after an hour, Ethan realized how wrong he was. Every direction looked the same. The trees blended together. The trails disappeared without warning. Before long, Ethan had no idea where he was. He spent nearly 2 hours wandering before finally finding his way back to the village. When he emerged from the forest, sweaty and exhausted, several villagers laughed. One young man shook his head. The billionaire got lost already. The others laughed. Ethan forced a smile and kept walking. Their words stung, but he refused to let them discourage him. The next morning, he returned to the forest. This time, things went even worse. While crossing a shallow stream, his foot slipped on a wet rock. He crashed into the water. Mud covered his clothes. His journal barely escaped damage. As he struggled back to his feet, he heard laughter from nearby villagers collecting firewood. Ethan sighed. Nothing seemed to be going right. For the next several days, the pattern continued. He got lost. He stumbled over roots. He scratched his arms on thorn bushes. Mosquitoes attacked him relentlessly. Every evening he returned to the village tired, hungry, and empty-handed. Some villagers began calling him City Hunter. The nickname was not meant as a compliment. They viewed him as a rich man playing a game, someone who would eventually give up and return to the city. But Ethan surprised them. Every morning before sunrise, he woke up and studied his grandfather's journals. He carefully read every page. He memorized drawings. He learned names of plants. He studied animal behavior. Then he went back into the forest and practiced. Again, and again, and again. Slowly, something began changing. The forest no longer looked like a confusing wall of trees. Patterns started appearing. Broken branches told stories. Bent grass revealed movement. Fresh footprints marked hidden paths. The signs had always been there. Ethan simply had not known how to see them. One afternoon, he discovered a series of tracks near a muddy patch of ground. Excited, he opened the journal. The drawings matched perfectly. Rabbit tracks. His heart raced. For the first time, he had found evidence of an animal without help. It seemed like a small achievement, but to Ethan it felt enormous. He followed the tracks carefully. The rabbit escaped before he got close enough. Still, Ethan smiled all the way home. Progress was progress. Days turned into weeks. The villagers gradually noticed something. The former billionaire was improving. His body was changing. The soft appearance created by years of office work began disappearing. His muscles grew stronger. His movements became more confident. His eyes seemed sharper. He walked differently now, like someone who belonged outdoors. One evening, Ethan sat outside his grandfather's house reading a journal when an elderly villager named Mama Grace approached. She carried a basket of roasted corn. Without speaking, she handed him one. "Thank you," Ethan said. She sat beside him. "I have been watching you." Ethan smiled nervously. "Hopefully not while I'm getting lost."
Mama grace laughed.
"Everyone gets lost when learning something new." She became serious. "Your grandfather was the same way." Ethan looked surprised. "He got lost too?" "Many times." Ethan laughed. For some reason, hearing that made him feel better. "The difference," she continued, "is that he never quit." She pointed at him. "And neither have you." Those words stayed with Ethan long after she left. A few days later, Ethan experienced another breakthrough. While exploring deeper into the forest, he noticed claw marks on a tree. Previously, he would have walked right past them. Now he stopped. He examined them carefully. The journal described similar markings. Small antelope often passed through the area. Nearby, he found tracks, then droppings, then signs of grazing. The clues connected like pieces of a puzzle. For the first time, Ethan understood what his grandfather had meant. The forest was always speaking. Most people simply did not know how to listen. That afternoon, Ethan successfully tracked an animal for nearly 2 hours. Eventually, he lost the trail, but he no longer felt frustrated. He felt encouraged, because he was learning. The next major victory came 1 week later. The morning began like any other. Ethan entered the forest before sunrise. A cool breeze moved through the trees.
Birds sans overhead.
Following fresh tracks, he moved quietly through the undergrowth. His grandfather's lessons guided every step. Move slowly. Stay patient. Watch carefully. Listen more than you speak. Hours passed. Then Ethan saw movement. A rabbit. His heart immediately began pounding. The animal remained unaware of his presence. Carefully, Ethan positioned himself. Every movement felt slow, controlled, focused. For several seconds, everything became silent. Then he acted. Moments later, the rabbit was his. Ethan stared at it in disbelief. He had actually done it. A huge smile spread across his face. For many people, catching a rabbit would seem insignificant. For Ethan, it represented something much bigger. It was proof. Proof that he could learn. Proof that he could survive. Proof that losing his fortune had not destroyed him. As he carried the rabbit back toward the village, several people noticed. At first, nobody said anything. Then one villager nodded. Another offered a smile. Even some of the people who had mocked him seemed impressed. That evening, Ethan prepared the meal himself. The simple food tasted better than many expensive meals he had eaten during his billionaire days. Not because of the flavor, because he had earned it. As darkness settled over Amani village, Ethan sat outside looking toward the forest. The stars filled the sky. The cool night air brushed against his face. For the first time since his world had collapsed, he felt something he had almost forgotten.
Pride.
Not the pride that came from wealth. Not the pride that came from power. A different kind of pride. The kind that comes from overcoming difficulty. The kind that comes from refusing to surrender. His grandfather's journals rested beside him. Ethan picked one up and opened it. A sentence written years earlier caught his eye. The strongest hunters are not those who never fail. They are those who keep walking after failure. Ethan stared at the words for a long time. Then he smiled, because he finally understood them. The billionaire who had lost everything was slowly disappearing. In his place, a hunter was beginning to emerge. And deep within the forest, greater challenges were still waiting for him. 6 months passed. By then, Ethan Cole was no longer the awkward former billionaire who stumbled through the forest and got lost every few hours. The forest had changed him. His skin had darkened beneath the sun. His body had become stronger from daily work. His eyes noticed details most people missed. Every morning before sunrise, Ethan entered the wilderness. Every evening, he returned with more knowledge than the day before. The villagers noticed. The same people who once laughed at him now watched him with growing respect. One morning, Ethan was repairing part of his grandfather's house when a worried farmer named Chike rushed toward him. Ethan stood up. What happened? My goat is missing. Ethan frowned. When did you last see it? Yesterday evening. Most villagers would have searched randomly. Ethan did something different. He grabbed his walking stick and followed Chike to the area where the goat had disappeared. The ground was soft from rain. Ethan examined the soil carefully. Fresh tracks were visible. After a few minutes, he stood. I found something. Chike looked hopeful. What is it? The goat walked toward the eastern forest. You can tell that from footprints? Ethan nodded. The two men followed the trail. Nearly an hour later, they found the goat trapped between thick bushes. The animal was unharmed. Chike stared at Ethan in amazement. You found it. Ethan smiled. The goat found itself. I just followed the signs. Word spread quickly through the village. The former billionaire had tracked down a missing animal. To many people, it seemed impressive. To Ethan, it was simply another lesson from his grandfather's journals. A few weeks later, another problem appeared. This time, farmers complained about a wild animal entering their farms at night. Several crops had been destroyed. Many villagers feared it might be a dangerous predator. The village chief called a meeting. Dozens of villagers gathered beneath a large tree. After everyone shared their concerns, the chief turned toward Ethan. "What do you think?" The question surprised him. Months earlier, nobody would have asked for his opinion. Now they were looking to him for answers. Ethan visited the damaged farms and studied the evidence. The tracks revealed the truth. "It isn't a predator," he explained during the next meeting. "What is it then?" someone asked. "A bush pig." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Ethan continued. "It comes at night. That's why nobody has seen it." The chief nodded. "What should we do?" Ethan spent the next few days tracking the animal. Eventually, he located its route and helped the farmers protect their crops. The problem disappeared. Once again, villagers praised him. Slowly, Ethan's reputation began growing beyond Amani village. Nearby communities started hearing stories. People talked about the former billionaire who had become a skilled hunter. At first, many did not believe the stories. Then visitors started arriving. One afternoon, a man from a neighboring village approached Ethan. "My brother told me about you." Ethan looked up from the fishing net he was repairing. "About what?" "They say you can find almost anything in the forest." Ethan laughed. "Not everything." The man smiled. "Can you help me?" His cow had gone missing 3 days earlier. Ethan agreed. Together they searched the forest. By sunset, they found the animal grazing near a stream several kilometers away. The grateful farmer could hardly believe it. News traveled fast. More visitors followed. Some needed help finding livestock. Others wanted advice about surviving in the forest. A few simply wanted to meet the famous hunter everyone was talking about. Despite the growing attention, Ethan remained humble. He never charged money. If someone offered food as thanks, he accepted politely. But he refused large rewards. This confused many people. After all, Ethan had once been a billionaire. Now he lived simply and helped others for free. One evening, while sitting outside his grandfather's house, Ethan thought about how much his life had changed. A year earlier, he had spent his days in boardrooms discussing million-dollar contracts. Now he spent his days following tracks through forests. Strangely, he felt happier. The pressure was gone. The endless competition was gone. The constant stress was gone. For the first time in years, he slept peacefully. One afternoon, a group of children approached him. They often followed him around the village. To them, Ethan was becoming something of a local hero. "Can you teach us about tracks?" one boy asked. Another nodded eagerly. "Please." Ethan smiled. He remembered being their age. Remembered following his grandfather through the forest. Perhaps it was time to pass those lessons forward. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began teaching the children simple skills. How to identify footprints. How to respect animals. How to move safely through nature. The children loved every lesson. Their excitement reminded Ethan of his younger self. One day, while watching the children practice, Mama Grace walked over. A smile spread across her face. "Your grandfather would be proud." Ethan looked toward the forest. The words touched him deeply. For a moment, he imagined his grandfather standing there, watching, smiling, proving. The thought filled him with warmth. That night, as darkness settled over Amani village, Ethan sat outside beneath a sky full of stars. The sounds of crickets echoed through the air. The forest stood quietly beyond the village. A year ago, Ethan had arrived as a broken man who had lost everything. Now people respected him. Not because of wealth. Not because of power. Not because of fame. They respected him because of who he had become. The villagers no longer saw a fallen billionaire. They saw a hunter, a helper, a teacher, a man willing to serve others. And although Ethan didn't know it yet, someone was about to enter his life who would change everything once again. By the time a full year had passed, Ethan Cole had become one of the most skilled hunters in Amani village. The villagers respected him. Children followed him around asking questions. Farmers often sought his help whenever animals went missing. Life had become peaceful. But Ethan still felt there was much he didn't know. Every time he entered the forest, he discovered something new. The deeper he learned, the more he realized how much remained hidden. One morning before sunrise, Ethan ventured farther into the forest than usual. A thick mist hung between the trees. The air was cool and silent. As he followed a narrow trail, he noticed something unusual. Fresh footprints. Human footprints. They were deep and clear in the soft ground. Someone had passed through recently. Curious, Ethan followed them. The tracks led deeper into the wilderness. For nearly an hour, he continued tracking them. Finally, he reached a small clearing. There, sitting beside a fire, was an old man. The stranger looked to be in his 70s. His gray beard reached his chest. His clothes were simple and worn. Yet there was something powerful about his presence. He looked up as Ethan approached. "I was wondering when you would find me." Ethan stopped. "You knew I was following you?" The old man smiled. "I knew the moment you stepped onto my trail." Ethan blinked. The answer was not arrogant. It was simply a fact. The old man pointed toward a nearby log. "Sit." Ethan obeyed. For several moments, neither spoke. The old man continued sharpening a knife. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "My name is Ethan." The old man nodded. "I know." That surprised him. "You know me?" "The entire region knows about the billionaire who became a hunter." Ethan laughed softly. "I suppose that's true." The old man finally set down the knife. "My name is Obesai." Ethan immediately recognized it. The forest elder. He had heard countless stories about him. Some claimed Obesai could track animals for days without losing their trail. Others said he knew every river, cave, and hidden path in the forest. Many villagers spoke about him almost like a legend. Yet few people had actually met him. "You are the famous Obesai?" Ethan asked. The old man chuckled. "I prefer simply Obesai." From that day forward, an unexpected friendship began. Whenever possible, Ethan visited the old hunter. At first, Obesai simply observed him. They walked through the forest together. Sometimes they traveled for hours without speaking. At first, Ethan found the silence uncomfortable. Later, he began appreciating it. Obesai taught differently from anyone Ethan had ever known. He rarely gave direct answers. Instead, he asked questions. One morning, they came across a set of tracks. "What do you see?" Obesai asked. "A deer." Obesai nodded. "What else?" Ethan examined the ground. "The deer is healthy." "What else?" Ethan looked again. Several minutes passed. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know." Obesai smiled. "The deer is traveling north." Ethan stared. "How can you tell?" "The forest is always speaking." Obesai pointed at the ground. "You must learn to listen." Slowly, Ethan's education continued. The old hunter taught him how to predict weather by studying birds, how to find water during dry seasons, how to recognize danger before it appeared. But the most important lessons had nothing to do with hunting. One afternoon, they sat beside a river watching fish swim beneath the surface. Without warning, Obesai asked, "Who are you?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The answer seemed obvious.
I'm Ethan Cole.
Obesai shook his head. "That is your name." Ethan thought for a moment. "I was a billionaire." Again, Obesai shook his head. "That was your job." Ethan became confused. "I don't understand." The old man looked toward the river. "If all your money disappeared tomorrow, would you still exist?" "Of course." "If your businesses disappeared?" "Yes." "If your reputation disappeared?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Obesai smiled. "Then those things are not who you are." The word struck Ethan deeply. For years, he had defined himself through success, through wealth, through achievements. Without those things, he had felt lost. Now he began questioning everything. That evening, Ethan walked home thinking about the conversation. For the first time, he realized how much of his identity had depended on money. Maybe that was why losing everything had hurt so much. Not because of the wealth itself, but because he no longer knew who he was without it. Over the following months, Obesai continued challenging him. Sometimes through questions, sometimes through stories, sometimes through silence. Gradually, Ethan changed. He became more patient, more observant, more thoughtful. The need to prove himself slowly disappeared. One evening, as they sat beside a campfire, Obesai handed Ethan a small carved wooden pendant. It was old and worn. "My grandfather gave this to me," Obesai said. Ethan looked surprised. "You want me to have it?" The old hunter nodded. "You have earned it." Ethan carefully accepted the gift. For a moment, neither man spoke. The fire crackled softly between them. Then Obesai smiled. "You came to the forest searching for survival." Ethan nodded. "Yes." The old hunter leaned back. "But the forest gave you something greater." "What?" Obesai's eyes reflected the firelight. "Yourself." Ethan stared into the flames. Deep inside, he knew the old man was right. The forest had given him more than skills, more than food, more than purpose. It had given him a chance to become someone entirely new. And although Ethan didn't know it yet, another life-changing encounter was waiting just around the corner. A meeting beside a river. A meeting with a woman named Zara. The rainy season had arrived in Amenyi village. Dark clouds often covered the sky, and the forest seemed greener than ever. Rivers flowed stronger, and cool winds moved through the trees every evening. One afternoon, Ethan Cole was returning from the forest after helping a farmer locate several missing goats. The day had been long and he was tired. As he approached the river that ran along the edge of the village, he noticed someone standing near the water. A young woman. She was struggling to pull a bicycle from the muddy riverbank. The bicycle's wheel had become stuck in thick mud. Ethan walked closer. "Need some help?" The woman looked up. For a moment, Ethan forgot what he was about to say. She had warm brown eyes and a bright smile despite her frustration. "I've been fighting this bicycle for 10 minutes, she said. Ethan laughed. "The bicycle seems to be winning." She laughed too. Unfortunately, without another word, Ethan stepped forward and grabbed the bicycle. A few seconds later, he pulled it free. The woman sighed with relief. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She brushed some dirt from her dress. "My name is Zara." Ethan. Neither of them realized it then, but that simple meeting would change both of their lives. Over the next few days, Ethan saw Zara several times around the village. Sometimes she was teaching children outside the small school. Sometimes she was helping elderly villagers carry supplies. Other times she simply walked through the village greeting everyone she met. One thing quickly became clear. Everyone liked her. Children loved her. Parents respected her. Even the village elders spoke highly of her. One morning, Ethan passed by the school while returning from the forest. He stopped when he heard laughter. Inside the classroom, Zara was telling a story. The children sat quietly, hanging on every word. Ethan found himself smiling. There was something special about the way she cared for people. Something genuine. After class ended, Zara noticed him standing outside. "Were you spying on my lesson?" she asked playfully. Ethan pretended to look offended. "I prefer the term observing." She laughed. "Of course you do." From that day forward, they began talking more often. At first, their conversations were short. Simple greetings, questions about their day, small jokes. But gradually, those conversations became longer. Soon they were spending entire evenings together. One evening, they sat beside the river watching the sunset. Orange light reflected across the water. The village seemed peaceful. Zara skipped a small stone across the river. "You know," she said, "when I first heard about you, I expected someone completely different." Ethan looked at her. "What did you expect?" "A proud businessman." Ethan laughed. "Sorry to disappoint you." "I'm glad you did." Her answer made him smile. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Not awkward, just peaceful. Something Ethan had rarely experienced before. As weeks passed, their friendship deepened. Zara often asked questions about the forest. Ethan enjoyed answering them. Sometimes he showed her animal tracks. Other times he taught her simple survival skills. In return, Zara told him stories about her students. She spoke about their dreams, their struggles, and the things that made them laugh. Ethan loved listening. One afternoon, while walking through the village, they passed a group of children. The children immediately ran toward Zara. "Teacher Zara." They surrounded her instantly. Ethan watched as she greeted every child by name. She remembered details about each one, their families, their favorite subjects, their goals. When the children finally left, Ethan shook his head. "I don't know how you remember all of that." Zara smiled. "They matter to me." The answer stayed with Ethan. It was one of the things he admired most about her. She genuinely cared about people. Not because she wanted something from them, but because that was simply who she was. Months earlier, Ethan had lost faith in people. His business partners had betrayed him. His friends had abandoned him. Even his fiancée had walked away. The experience had left scars. Deep ones. Yet somehow Zara slowly began healing them. Not through grand gestures. Not through speeches. Simply through kindness. One evening, heavy rain trapped them inside a small shelter near the river. The storm pounded the roof above them. Lightning flashed across the sky. As they waited, Zara looked at Ethan. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you miss your old life?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment he thought carefully. Then he answered honestly. "Some parts." Zara nodded. "Which parts?" "The people I thought cared about me." His voice grew quieter. "But most of them disappeared when the money disappeared." Zara looked at him sympathetically. "That must have hurt." It did. Rain continued falling around them. After a long silence, Zara spoke again. "For what it's worth, I think losing those people may have helped you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How?" "Because now you know who truly matters." He stared at her. The simplicity of her words struck him. She was right. Painful as it had been, losing everything had revealed truths he never would have discovered otherwise. The storm eventually ended, but neither of them rushed to leave. For a while they simply sat there talking, laughing, sharing stories, enjoying each other's company. As darkness settled over the village, Ethan walked Zara home. When they reached her gate, she turned toward him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being my friend." Ethan smiled. "Thank you for being mine." Zara smiled back before disappearing inside. Ethan stood there for several seconds. Then he began walking home. A strange feeling filled his chest. Warm, comforting, hopeful. For years he had chased wealth, success, and power. He had believed those things would bring happiness. But standing beneath the stars that night, Ethan realized something important. The happiest moments of his life were not happening in boardrooms. They were happening beside rivers, in simple conversations, with a woman whose smile brightened his entire day. And deep inside, Ethan knew the truth. His feelings for Zara were no longer friendship. They were becoming something much deeper, something that could change his future forever. Nearly 2 years had passed since Ethan Cole arrived in Amani village with nothing but a small bag and a broken heart. Life had changed in ways he never imagined. The villagers respected him. The forest had become his second home. And most importantly, Zara had become the most important person in his life. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly happy. He no longer thought about billion-dollar deals. He no longer cared about luxury cars or private jets. Those things belonged to another life. Or so he believed. One bright morning, Ethan was helping several children identify animal tracks near the edge of the forest. The lesson was going well. The children laughed excitedly every time they guessed correctly. Then a strange sound interrupted them. Engines. Several powerful engines. Ethan frowned. Luxury vehicles were rare in Amani village. Very rare. The children immediately ran toward the road. Curious villagers emerged from their homes. Within minutes, nearly half the village had gathered. A convoy of black SUVs rolled into the village and stopped near the chief's meeting area. The vehicles looked completely out of place among the simple homes and dirt roads. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Something was wrong. The doors opened. Several men stepped out wearing expensive suits. Then one familiar face appeared. Ethan froze. Michael! The man smiled. Ethan. Michael Grant had been Ethan's lawyer for nearly 10 years. The last time they had spoken was shortly after Ethan lost everything. Michael quickly walked toward him. Ethan, I've been searching for you. The villagers exchanged confused looks. Many had never heard Ethan speak to anyone from his old life. Ethan crossed his arms. What are you doing here? Michael looked around before speaking. We need to talk. Minutes later, they sat beneath a large tree away from most of the crowd. Zara stood nearby, quietly watching. Ethan could see concern in her eyes. Michael opened a briefcase and removed several documents. His expression was serious. Ethan, everything has changed. Ethan remained silent. The investigation is over. His heart skipped a beat. What investigation? You know exactly which one. For a moment, neither man spoke. The memories came rushing back. The accusations, the betrayal, the collapse of his empire, the loss of everything. Michael slid a folder across the table. The authorities found new evidence. Ethan stared at it. And the people who framed you have confessed. The world seemed to stop. Ethan blinked. What? Michael nodded. The financial records were forged. Ethan's chest tightened. The transfers? Fake. The signatures? Forged. The accusations? False. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. For nearly 2 years he had carried the weight of those accusations. Even after starting a new life, part of him still carried that pain. Now Michael was telling him the truth had finally emerged. They admitted everything? Ethan asked. Everything. Michael leaned forward. The real criminals have been arrested. For several seconds, Ethan could not speak. A strange mixture of emotions flooded through him. Relief, anger, shock, sadness. Years of suffering because of other people's greed. Years he could never get back. Michael continued. There's more. Ethan looked up. More. Most of your assets can be returned. The words hung in the air. The villagers nearby continued watching, unaware of the conversation. Ethan sat completely still. Returned. Michael nodded. Your companies. Ethan said nothing. Your properties. Still nothing. Your investments. The silence grew heavier. Michael finally spoke again. Ethan, you're a billionaire again. The sentence sounded unreal. 2 years earlier, Ethan might have celebrated. 2 years earlier, he would have immediately demanded details. Now he simply stared at the ground. Michael looked confused. Aren't you happy? Ethan thought carefully before answering. I don't know. The lawyer frowned. What do you mean? Ethan looked around the village. Children played nearby. Farmers worked in the distance. Simple homes stood beneath the afternoon sun. This place had become home. This place had saved him. Then his eyes found Zara. She stood quietly beneath a tree, watching, listening, waiting. The thought of leaving suddenly felt painful. Michael followed his gaze. Who is she? Ethan smiled slightly. Someone important. Michael nodded slowly. Understanding appeared in his eyes. The conversation spread quickly through the village. By evening, everyone knew the truth. Their hunter had once been a billionaire. And now he was one again. The reactions were mixed. Some villagers were shocked. Others were amazed. A few simply couldn't believe it. Many of them had known Ethan only as the humble hunter who helped everyone. The idea that he owned massive companies and enormous wealth seemed impossible. That evening, Ethan walked alone beside the river. His mind felt crowded. For years he had dreamed of clearing his name. Now it had finally happened. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he felt confused. Footsteps approached behind him. He turned. Zara. She stopped beside him. Neither spoke immediately. The river flowed quietly beside them. Finally, Zara broke the silence. So it's true. Ethan nodded. Yes. You were a billionaire. Once. And now. Ethan looked away. I guess I am again. Zara remained quiet. Ethan suddenly felt nervous. More nervous than he had felt in years. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I'm thinking that none of it changes who you are." Relief washed over him. "You don't care." Zara laughed. "About your money?" He nodded. "No." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without doubt. "No," she repeated. "Because the Ethan I know is the man who helps farmers, teaches children, and spends hours walking through forests." Her eyes met his. "That's the man I care about." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The words touched him more deeply than she realized. After everything he had experienced, hearing that meant everything. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Ethan stood beside the river and looked toward the village. His old life had returned. The wealth, the businesses, the opportunities. Everything he had lost was suddenly within reach again. All he had to do was sign a few documents. But for the first time in his life, the decision wasn't easy. Because Ethan Cole was no longer the man who had arrived in Amenyi village years ago. And the choice standing before him would determine the rest of his future. The morning after Michael's visit, Ethan Cole barely slept. Long before sunrise, he sat outside his grandfather's house, staring into the darkness. The village was quiet. Only the distant sounds of insects and rustling leaves broke the silence. On the table beside him lay the documents Michael had brought. Documents that could return everything he had lost. His companies, his properties, his investments, his fortune. A single signature could restore the life he once knew. Yet instead of excitement, Ethan felt uncertain. For years he had imagined this moment. He had dreamed of proving his innocence. He had dreamed of clearing his name. Now that the opportunity had finally arrived, something felt different. Because he was different. Later that week, Ethan traveled to the city with Michael. As the vehicle approached the skyline, memories returned. The towering buildings, the crowded streets, the endless traffic. Once, this world had felt exciting. Now it felt strangely distant, like a place he had visited in another lifetime. When they arrived at his former headquarters, employees rushed to greet him. Many of them looked emotional. Some even applauded. News of his innocence had spread quickly. "Ethan, welcome back. We always believed in you. It's good to see you again." The words sounded familiar. Too familiar. Ethan remembered how many of these same people had disappeared when trouble began. Not all of them, but many. Now they smiled as if nothing had happened. He smiled politely in return, but inside, he felt cautious. The next few days were filled with meetings. Lawyers explained legal updates. Financial experts presented reports. Executives discussed company operations. According to the numbers, most of his business empire could be recovered. The companies remained valuable. The investments had survived. His fortune would return almost completely. From a business perspective, it was excellent news. Yet every evening, Ethan found himself thinking about Amenyi village. He missed the forest. He missed the quiet mornings. He missed the simple life he had built. Most of all, he missed Zara. One night, Ethan stood on the balcony of a luxury hotel overlooking the city. Below him, thousands of lights stretched into the distance. Years earlier, this view would have impressed him. Now it felt empty. His phone rang. The screen showed Zara's name. A smile immediately appeared on his face. "Hello. How's city life?" she asked. Ethan laughed softly. Loud. Zara laughed too. "I figured." For nearly an hour they talked. Nothing important. Nothing dramatic. Just ordinary conversation. But when the call ended, Ethan realized something. That simple conversation had brought him more happiness than anything he had experienced during the entire week. The realization stayed with him. The following day, Ethan attended a meeting with several former business associates. As soon as he entered the room, everyone stood. Smiles appeared everywhere. Compliments filled the air. People who had ignored him for years suddenly treated him like royalty again. The change was obvious and uncomfortable. One businessman wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulder. "We should celebrate." Another nodded. "Now that you're back where you belong." Ethan forced a smile, but deep inside he knew something important. This was no longer where he belonged. That evening he visited one of his old mansions. The massive building had once represented success. Now it felt like a museum. Beautiful, impressive, empty. As he walked through the silent halls, memories returned. Years of stress, years of pressure, years spent chasing bigger deals and larger profits. Back then, he believed happiness was always one achievement away. One business deal away. One promotion away. $1 billion away. Yet he had never truly been satisfied. The realization struck him hard. Losing everything had been painful, but it had also taught him something priceless. Money could provide comfort. Money could create opportunities. But money alone could not create peace. A few days later, Michael arrived with the final documents. Everything was ready. All Ethan needed to do was make a decision. The lawyer sat across from him. "So," Michael said, "what happens now?" Ethan looked out the window. Far beyond the city stood the forest surrounding Amani village. The place that had rebuilt his life. The place that had healed him. The place where Zara was waiting. Finally, he turned back toward Michael. "I'll reclaim the businesses." The lawyer smiled. "I thought you would. But on one condition." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What condition?" Ethan leaned forward. "I'm not returning to my old life." The smile faded into confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'll own the companies." Ethan paused. "But I won't let them own me." For years, business had controlled every part of his life. That would never happen again. He would use his wealth differently. He would build schools, create opportunities, help communities like Amani. The money would serve a purpose, not become the purpose. Michael slowly nodded. For the first time, he understood. The man sitting before him was no longer the ambitious billionaire he once knew. He was something more, something better. With a steady hand, Ethan signed the documents. His fortune was officially restored. But as he placed the pen down, he smiled. Not because he was rich again, because he knew exactly where he was going next. Home. 2 weeks after reclaiming his businesses, Ethan Cole returned to Amani village. The moment his vehicle entered the village, children ran alongside it, cheering and waving. Word had spread that Ethan was coming home. Not as a visitor, not as a billionaire, but as one of them. When Ethan stepped out of the vehicle, he was greeted by smiling faces everywhere. Farmers shook his hand. Elders welcomed him warmly. Children surrounded him with excitement. And standing near the front of the crowd was Zara. The moment their eyes met, Ethan smiled. For the first time since returning to the city, he felt completely at peace. That evening, the village gathered to celebrate. Music filled the air. Food was shared. Stories were told around small fires. As Ethan sat among the villagers, he realized something important. These people had stood by him when he had nothing. They had respected him before his fortune returned. That loyalty could never be bought. Over the following months, Ethan began putting his plans into action. Unlike before, he wasn't interested in building wealth for the sake of becoming richer. He wanted to make a difference. The first project was a new school. The old village school was small and overcrowded. Many children lacked proper learning materials. Ethan funded the construction of a modern school building with classrooms, books, and equipment. When construction began, excitement spread throughout the village. Parents smiled with hope. Children eagerly watched the workers every day. Zara could hardly believe it. One afternoon, she walked through the construction site with Ethan. The sound of hammers echoed around them. "This is amazing," she said. Ethan smiled. "The children deserve it." Zara looked at him. "You could have spent this money anywhere." "I know. Why here?" Ethan glanced toward the village. "Because this place gave me a second chance." The school was only the beginning. Soon, Ethan funded a medical clinic. For years, villagers had traveled long distances for healthcare. Now they would have access to treatment much closer to home. After that came clean water projects, new roads, scholarship programs for students, small business loans for local families. Every project created opportunities. Every project improved lives. As the years passed, neighboring villages also benefited. People who had once struggled now had new possibilities. Children who dreamed of becoming doctors, teachers, and engineers finally had a path forward. The impact continued growing. Yet despite all his wealth, Ethan remained the same man the villagers had come to know. He still woke early. He still walked through the forest. He still helped farmers when animals went missing. He still spent time with village elders listening to their stories. Whenever people praised him, he simply smiled and changed the subject. One evening, Ethan sat beneath a large tree with Mama Grace. The elderly woman watched children playing nearby. "You've done well," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "I've tried."
Mama Grace nodded.
"Your grandfather would be proud." Hearing those words never got old. Ethan looked toward the forest in the distance. Many of the lessons guiding his life had started there. Not in boardrooms, not in luxury offices, but in the wilderness his grandfather had loved. Then there was Zara. Throughout every project, every challenge, and every success, she remained beside him. Her support never wavered. Her kindness never changed. One evening, Ethan invited Zara to the river where they had spent so much time together. The sunset painted the water gold. The same peaceful river that had witnessed their friendship grow now witnessed something more. Ethan took a deep breath. Then he reached into his pocket. Zara's eyes widened. "Ethan," he smiled nervously. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals, this felt far more difficult. "Zara," he said, "you were there when I had nothing." Tears began forming in her eyes. "You helped me become the man I am today." He lowered himself onto one knee. "I don't want to imagine my future without you in it." The river flowed quietly beside them. The world seemed to stand still. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, Zara simply stared at him. Then tears rolled down her cheeks as she smiled. "Yes." Ethan laughed with relief. Zara laughed too. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, neither of them noticed the first stars appearing overhead. But they both knew one thing. The greatest chapter of their lives was only beginning. The wedding of Ethan Cole and Zara became one of the most talked about events in the region. People traveled from nearby villages, towns, and cities to attend. Farmers sat beside business executives. Village elders shared tables with government officials. Teachers laughed alongside company directors. It was a gathering unlike anything Amenyi village had ever seen. Yet despite the attention, Ethan insisted on keeping the celebration simple. The ceremony took place beneath the open sky near the river where he and Zara had spent countless evenings together. The same river where they had become friends. The same river where they had fallen in love. And the same river where Ethan had asked her to marry him. As Zara walked toward him, dressed beautifully and smiling through happy tears, Ethan felt something he had never felt during all his years of wealth and success. Contentment. Not excitement. Not pride. Not ambition. Contentment. The kind that came from knowing he was exactly where he was supposed to be. When they exchanged their vows, the crowd erupted in applause. Children cheered. Villagers wiped tears from their eyes. Even some of Ethan's business associates appeared emotional. The celebration lasted long into the night. Music filled the village. Laughter echoed through the air. For many people, it felt like a celebration of more than just a marriage. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Years passed. Ethan's businesses continued to thrive. Under his leadership, the companies became stronger than ever before. But unlike the younger Ethan, he no longer measured success by profits alone. He measured success by impact. Every year, his foundation built new schools. Hospitals opened in underserved communities. Scholarships helped thousands of students pursue their dreams. Clean water projects transformed villages across the country. Jobs were created. Families were lifted out of poverty. Lives changed. Reporters often requested interviews. Many wanted to know the secret behind his success. They expected answers about business strategies and investment techniques. Instead, Ethan often spoke about his grandfather, about the forest, about humility, about learning what truly matters. Most people found the answer surprising, but Ethan knew it was the truth. One afternoon, several years later, a young journalist visited Amani village. She followed Ethan as he walked through the community. Children ran up to greet him. Farmers waved. Shop owners smiled. The journalist looked amazed. "You could live anywhere in the world," she said. "Why stay here?" Ethan smiled. "Because this is home." The journalist glanced around. "But you're one of the wealthiest men in the country." Ethan nodded. "And," she laughed, "most billionaires don't live in villages." Ethan looked toward the forest. "Most billionaires never lost everything." The journalist became quiet. After a moment, she asked one final question. "What's the biggest lesson you've learned?" Ethan stopped walking. For a few seconds, he thought about the answer. His mind traveled back through the years. The luxury mansions, the betrayal, the loneliness, the abandoned house, the forest, the villagers, Zara, everything. Finally, he smiled. "Money is useful," he said, "but it isn't life." The journalist listened carefully. "I once thought wealth meant owning more than everyone else." He shook his head. "I was wrong." The afternoon sun filtered through the trees as Ethan continued. "Real wealth is having people who love you when you have nothing." His voice grew softer. "Real wealth is waking up with purpose." He smiled again. "And real wealth is becoming someone you're proud to be." Years later, those words would become famous. They appeared in newspapers, books, and speeches. But for Ethan, they were simply the truth. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Ethan stood outside his grandfather's restored house. Nearby, Zara watched their children play beneath the trees. Laughter filled the air. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the village. The same forest that had once welcomed a broken man with nowhere to go. The same forest that had taught him patience, resilience, and humility. Ethan looked toward the horizon and smiled. Losing everything had once seemed like the greatest tragedy of his life. Now he understood it had also been the greatest gift. Because losing everything had allowed him to discover what truly mattered. As the evening breeze moved through the trees, Ethan quietly whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." Then he turned and walked back toward his family, toward his home, toward the life he had built. A life richer than any fortune could ever provide. And in that moment, Ethan Cole was truly the richest man alive. If you enjoyed Ethan's journey from billionaire to village hunter, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more amazing stories. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.